The kinds of tools that you're going to use during your research process, the apparatus that you may be using, the instruments that you might be using, and even the facility that you might be using is really important to consider. You want, for good research, to have an environment and all of its contents as similar as possible from one subject to the next one. You don't want to change the lighting or the environment or the comfort of the chairs or the temperature of the room. You want everything to be as similar as possible, so none of those extraneous factors within the room could alter your research. Each change of environment or breakdown of apparatus can change the course of your research and the outcomes of the study. And this is also the case with human interaction. Interaction with subjects should be as similar as possible with every encounter where they come in. If you've got more than one person conducting the research, if you have your assistant investigators or you do it through a clinical research organization, you want every single person to approach patients in the same way, with the same friendly manner, and really make sure that this doesn't then become a variable, because some people are brusque and not very welcoming and other people are welcoming. So we want to look at that as well. The procedure is a step-by-step plan of what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and it has to be one of the most important parts of your research. Not only is the IRB going to want to look at this and find out exactly what you're going to be doing, but if you vary again, your research becomes potentially biased or it will weaken the outcomes. So your step-by-step instructions will help the researcher walk through the interactions with their subjects with very little variance. And if I have somebody who is assisting me, they can walk through the interactions with clients in the same manner. If the subject pool is medium or large, and your formula that we spoke of earlier will help you determine that, you may need clinical research associates to assist. And also there's a potential with some studies to have numerous facility sites. And you have to do your very best to try and make most of those as similar as possible. When you have more than one person, you want to sit down and have team meetings and make sure interactions are scripted and don't have to be delivered from a script, but they definitely must be practiced so there's some similarity in deliverance. If ongoing, meaning that you're going to have follow-up visit after follow-up visit, it's important to really make sure you have the scheduling process down pat as well. You want to consider the subject number that you will want to have at the end of the study. So you want to overfill your study in order to maintain a reasonable subject number once you have people who are either no-shows or dropouts. So you have to compensate for that in the beginning as opposed to the end and then say, oh my goodness, I don't have enough people for this study. And that causes you to really lose time and incur more costs. Your plan for researchers to be at designated areas to welcome and escort subjects to the research facility is really important, so people aren't floundering around and they know exactly what's expected of them when they arrive and where they go and that sort of thing. The facility needs to be scheduled with a great deal of time so you can account for holidays, days off, times that your subjects couldn't come, for instance. And then you get to the consent. Consent is a really important step, and you have to be really careful to construct a comprehensive consent. It should explain all of the pieces of the project, and it should be written in an appropriate language consistent with the comprehension level of the potential participants. In this country, the average reading level, if you look at the entire United States population together, is not much more than 6th or 7th grade. And that's actually up a little bit from the previous, which was 5th grade. Depending on who you have as your pool of participants, you may be able to write it in a level that's a little bit higher than that. But you have to understand who your potential participant base is in order to write your consent in a language that would always be understood. And you also want to really avoid words that could have ambiguous meanings. You don't want to use, and I think I may mention this later, you don't want to use words like imagine, be as accurate as possible. Well, clearly, if they're committed to the study, they're going to try and be as accurate as possible. And what does imagine mean to me as opposed to what it means to somebody else? So those are not the words that we want to use. You want very clear, concise, understandable, and readable instructions. Participants must be ready to participate without any coercion, and they must understand that they may decline to participate further without any kind of retribution. Participants also should understand what the purpose of the study is, the time frame of the study, and what the expectations of them should be. Step-by-step instructions for what the process will be is included, and you can use that document that you sent to the IRB and re-level it to make sure that it's at the correct reading level and understanding level for your particular participants, but you can use that as a base. Further, the researcher has to describe any benefits of the study. You know, what might this study tell us that might be beneficial to those participants? And I hadn't really picked out a type of study, but if it is proven that homework doesn't help a student learn, that might have some potential benefits to the students that are concerned going forward. Any incentives that you utilize, including monetary payment or gift cards or transportation costs or anything like that, is to be outlined in detail. And you have to very much delineate if the participant doesn't or isn't able to fulfill the entire study. Do they get a percentage of that incentive? Do they get prorated? How do they work that so you don't have any fusses on the end when you get done? Is there any partial payment? In other words, is there any partial credit that the subject gets if they're a no-show or if they drop from the study? The information that you provide should be provided if the research illuminates a problem that the subject needs help with. This is like depression. Some people who are currently, they're included in the criteria, but they may be treating for a particular ailment, but everybody's being treated the same way. Maybe this is a new drug for that particular syndrome, and in this case, I'm using depression, and this will ultimately benefit them. The subjects should know that they can refuse to respond to particular questions. So if one of your instruments is a survey or questionnaire, and there's a question on it that seems to be too invasive or really delves into private matters, they have to be told that they don't have to answer it. And a full explanation of both confidentiality procedures must be carried out, explained to them, and you need to make sure you maintain that confidentiality at all costs. And one thing that I'll say about that last slide is we learned the very hard way in the Tuskegee experiments, which I've done a lot of reading and studying about in other courses, that we can limit our ability to continue research with a particular population group for a long time. And if you look in the research, the amount of studies done on African American groups and populations is much less than on Caucasian people. Now it's beginning to equal out a little bit, but one of the things that needs to be studied for African Americans is the propensity towards high blood pressure, and particularly in African American men, very early on, because they begin to get high blood pressure at 35 or 40 years old. There's not a lot of research about that, although it's increasing, as I mentioned. And that is because there's always this very scary study that was done way back when, but whose information sort of rides through the generations. And so many African American people are very hesitant to embark upon a research study. Your instructions also need to include the purpose, or even the disguised purpose, as well as all of the tasks that you're going to ask your participants to perform. The requests, I've already mentioned this, can't be ambiguous. Clarity is of the utmost importance, and the words like imagine or guess or put yourself in this position should be avoided. We want clear, cut, simple instructions. And then we're ready for data collection. I'm going to mention pilot studies in just a few minutes, but let's talk about data collection, and then we'll talk about the benefits of doing a pilot study. Once you've gotten your consents from each and every participant, or at least the ones that you're going to start, given them your instructions with all of the explanations that will help them understand exactly what's expected, then you can begin your data collection. all efforts have to be taken to move through the procedure in the same way for every encounter. I know that I've sort of honed in on this particular point over and over and over again, but I have worked with a clinical research study that this actually became a huge burden for the clinical investigators that were working on it, and we had to repeat things. And variations can cause your research to either be invalidated or not as robust and rigorous as you want it to be, and you can't make the inferences or offer to the scientific community the body of research that you had planned on. And then you go through, once everything is done, all of your data collection is there, participants begin to be finished with their participation in the study, there is a requirement for debriefing. And there are 3 reasons for this, and this was from our textbook. There is an ethical reason. If you had any kind of deception going on in your trial where people thought that, well, placebo, non-placebo, for instance, you want to come clean about that and let them know, and then offer them, perhaps, if it's found to be really beneficial, whatever product you're using, many times we will offer them the opportunity to have that same therapeutic treatment, the therapeutic treatment that we found to be really beneficial to people. If there are negative effects on the subject, such as perhaps stress or physiological symptoms, it has to be remedied. So if people were really stressed about whether or not they were getting the placebo, that's why the real drug is oftentimes offered. Educationally, we want to provide evidence on the outcomes of the study, or prepare the participants to know that they are going to have follow-up once our outcomes are completed and our statistical analysis is done. And methodological is the provision of value of the variable manipulated. So if we have an independent variable and we manipulate it in such a way and we get really good results and are able to refute our null hypothesis, we want to tell them why we manipulated that variable so they understand that. So a pilot study, and often it is a really good thing to do a pilot study with a few participants, very small number, so you can identify if we have any gaps in our process, for instance, our procedures, our instructions, if it's written at a too high level, too low level, that's a really ambiguous kind of thing, because you want to write it so people can read it, but you also don't want to be condescending and embarrass them. So you really need to get that right. So we use a small number of people and we get feedback from them. So we're really looking to identify those gaps in the procedure or the instructions. It builds experience for your researchers on how to conduct the study and how it works well. And some pieces of the study, those transition pieces, okay, now we're going to pull our subjects, and now we're going to get them to fill out some demographic information, and now we're going to enter them into the study. Those transitions from one to the other. How does the scheduling best work? How are we going to move patients through the study to the end so we can come up with some outcomes? Whoops.